Good evening, Ponte de Luz. So good to have you all and pray and study together. Tonight we're gonna start question 155, and it's a long one. So let's see if we can finish. Hopefully we will. We will. And before we do so, let's thank God for bringing us tonight together. Dear God, we thank you, Lord, for bringing us together this evening, for keeping us in good health and all through the challenges of life. We're here, Lord, to study the Spirit's book. We're here to be in communion of energy, bringing light to the homes of the ones that are here and to the ones that need the light and the peace and the healing. Protect all our brothers and sisters that are now suffering and be with us. And with your permission, we start the study of the Spirit's book. So be it. It's so good to see you all and to be here to study this book. It's I always say Thursday is one of my favorite days of the week because we're here together. And we're going to continue the chapter, The Return from the Corporeal to Spirit Life. We are talking, last class, remember we spoke about question 154, the beginning of how the separation of the soul from the body happens. And I even remember saying that it was about suffering, right? How the spirit suffers or not. And the spirits told Kardec no, that there's no suffering and through this separation in that moment. But I remember vividly I said that when I saw my great grandmother 1 or 2 weeks before she returned to the spiritual world, I remember that her eyes were glassy. She was not there anymore, and I could see, I could perceive the detachment, the loosening of the bonds that keep the spirit tied to the body. We know that the perispirit is the link that connects body to spirit, but we know that this separation is something that a lot of literature after the Spirit's book came and they were published afterwards about this subject. It's really an interesting subject. Question 155 is going to explain to you in details. So I'm really glad that we can study it together. So question 155. How does the separation of the soul from the body occur? How does it happen? So how does the separation from the soul to from the body occur? So the time that the person dies or goes back to the spiritual world, how does that happen? So the spirits answered Kardec. The bonds that had held the soul loosen it and releases itself. So I'm going to read it again. The bonds, the ties that had held the soul loosen. So it loosens and it releases itself. The soul releases itself. So let's think about something like that. When we think about loosen it, we think about like a cloth that is very tight on you when you're when you gain some weight, and then when you lose some weight, the cloth gets what? Loose, right, on you. The same thing. That's what's happening here. The sense of loosening it, the bonds are not so tight. So there is a sub question within the question. Does this separation occur instantly in a sudden transition? Is there a well-defined dividing line between life and death? Isn't that an amazing question, right? So, does that happen instantly or in a sudden? We remember we kind of spoke about it last class, right? So if you missed that one, go back last week's and study with us the previous questions 154 and 153. The answer that the spirits gave Kardec was no. So it's not instantly or in a sudden. It's going to vary. We're going to see that. No, the soul releases itself gradually, gradually, little by little. It does not escape like a captive bird that is suddenly set free. The two states touch and intermingle with each other in such a way that the spirit releases itself little by little from its bonds, which are loosened but not yet broken. This is a beautiful question. I have something in my eye, sorry. And I can't read it well. So the two states intermingle. So we see that it's not the ties the ties between body and spirit through the perispirit, they're tight. And when the person is starting in the process of, gradually disconnecting from it, they are little by little loosened and not yet broken. This question has a very, very big explanation, one of the notes from Kardec. So, but before we do so, I remember another episode of seeing that happening, that loosening, not only with my great grandmother, but there was this amazing person that used to actually be part of Ponto de Luz, and when her husband, her name is Leah, and when her husband Joe was in a home here in Long Island, um, hospice, I was able to go and visit them a couple of days in this final phase of his life, right? That was way pre-COVID. That we're talking about what, 5 years ago, maybe more. And I remember one of those visits. I said, Leah, let's pray with him. Let's pray. And he was like agitated, and it was a day that was the energy was shifting clearly to me. And as I started praying, and when I opened my eyes, his hands were like, he had his hands like Superman. He was like he was going to fly. And he was obviously seeing the people that were waiting for him in the spiritual world. And I remember her reaction to it. She started grabbing his arms and she was like, no, no, put it down. Put it down. And I'm like, leave it. He's seeing something. But at that moment, his eyes were like looking at something that we couldn't see, but he could. And that was the process. So I remember like a few weeks later, he finally departed and disconnected completely. But at that time, he didn't want to eat. He was talking very little. So the spirit was not completely here anymore. It was not there yet. But I am positive most of us have had the experience to see someone disconnecting like that. This is what we're going to read now. The spirit, and this is now the note, that's the end of question 155. The spirit is connected to the body during life by its semi-material envelope or perispirit, which I spoke. Death is the destruction of the body, but not of the perispirit's envelope, which separates from the body when organic life ceases. So when organic life ceases, that's when the separation happens. Well, there is an exception to it. Question 156, we'll talk about it. But sometimes that the spirit is gone, but material life remains because of the beating of the heart and the flow of the blood. So we're going to study that too. But in as a rule, um, life ceases. The body separates from the body when organic life ceases. That's when the spirit separates completely, when those bonds are broken. Observation has shown that at the moment of death, the spirit's departure does not occur suddenly. It occurs gradually and may vary in speed according to the individual. Remember, we spoke about this. People that live this life trying to disconnect from matter, um, in their actions, in their thoughts, trying to live a spiritual life and understand what spiritual life is, they have a much easier process. Sometimes it is instantaneous. The Spirit's book is going to tell us. And one of the father of a great friend of mine, when they received a communication about his departure, about his disconnection completely, at that moment he had a heart attack. And as he communicated to the family right after, through a message, spiritual message, he said that that moment was beautiful. He was received by spirits. He woke up immediately. He was disconnected then, and he started working right away. So we know that this is possible, and we're going to see that. So let's go back. Observation has shown that at the moment of death, the spirit's departure does not occur suddenly. It occurs gradually and may vary in speed according to the individual. Each person is different. For some, it is very quick. And in such case, one could say that the moment of death is also that of liberation, which happens soon afterwards. However, for others, especially those whose life has been materialistic and sensual, the separation takes much longer, sometimes lasting for days, weeks, and even months. Imagine that. Days, weeks, and even months. We're going to explain that when we read a little bit more because it's going to be important, this next part. This does not imply that there is any vitality remaining in the body or any possibility that it might return to life. It only means that an affinity, perceive this word, affinity, persists between the body and the spirit. An affinity that always depends on the importance that the spirit has given to matter during life. So the more you're attached to materialistic things, the more you're attached to sensual things, the more you're connected to the things of this earth, the harder and the longer it will take for you to completely have those bonds broken. So, continuing. On the other hand, intellectual and moral activity and elevated thoughts initiate the separation even during corporeal life. And when death finally occurs, it is almost instantaneous. That was the case of my friend's father. He worked very hard to um, to serve and to be of service for many causes, and he was a spiritist. He was very involved. He tried his best, and when he had that moment of that heart attack, soon afterwards he was in the spiritual world, working and being able to communicate with his family. So that's a blessing. All this is the result of the studies involving individuals at the moment of death and demonstrates that the affinity affinity that persists between the soul and the body in some individuals can be extremely painful. The spirit may even experience the horror of decomposition. Such a case is exceptional and peculiar to certain kinds of death, suicides, for example. This is a topic for long, long studies. This question obviously doesn't exhaust the subject. I remember one of the most traumatic books that I read when I was a kid. I shouldn't have bought it, but I don't even remember the title, to be honest with you. But it had chapters and chapters talked about this woman that was still connected and seeing her body decompose. It was a spiritist book, but it was very descriptive on the process. And I was really like scared. I was scared to see how in detail she could describe um, the things that were happening to her and the situation with the suicidals, the people that committed suicide. We know that is the outcome of that. If one thing that the Spiritist doctrine helps us a lot is to understand that no one has the right to take away what God has given us. No one, not even ourselves. And if we do so, the consequences of that are very painful. The spirits that commit suicide, they keep feeling the pain of the moment of death over and over and over again. And the place that they are is surrounded with pain and suffering. So we as spiritists, and there's another story. Today I'm a storyteller. All the stories are coming and I have to share them with you. There is a story of this that I think Divaldo said, told us about the story about this a woman that used to take her son to the gospel, to the study, the gospel for kids, right? Evangelização. And eventually that boy went uh, decided to move outside of Brazil and was not going in a good way. He became prostituting himself and doing things that his mom tried so hard to help him avoid. And at one point, they had this conversation, and she said, what did I do wrong with you? I tried so hard, and I don't know what I could have done different." And he says, "Mom, if it wasn't by you and by what I heard and what I learned in that spiritist center, I would have taken my life long ago." How comforting it is to understand that a tidbit, a little thing, one little thing that you can do for someone else, and educating the spirit of a child is not a tidbit, is a huge. Working with kids for so many years, over 15 years, was most certainly the best thing that I did for myself, for my personal growth, for my spiritual growth. You learn so much, you exchange so much, and helping kids develop that morality in them. It's the parents are primarily the ones, right? But what they get from the teachers at the Spiritist Center as evangelizadoras, the ones that are there with them, is precious. Is precious. The what happens there in that classroom is beyond what the eyes can see. So we are gonna let's do 156 and 156. We have time. We're gonna have the explanation about what I just spoke. The exception when the spirit is no longer there, but the physical body is still running. Question 156. Can the definitive separation between the soul, can the definitive separation between the soul and the body occur before the complete cessation of organic life? So the Kardec is asking the spirits, can that separation between the soul and the body occur before the end of organic life? Because the previous question, we studied that it happens when organic life ceases. And they're saying if there is a case that it could be, and then that could happen. And then the spirits answered, sometimes in the death throes, which is agony, in the death throes, the soul has already left the body, which has nothing left in it except organic life. The individual no longer has self awareness, and yet a faint breath of life still remains. The body is a machine that is kept going by the heart, and it continues to live as long as the heart circulates blood in the veins. And for that, it does not need the soul. So we can, in as a rule, ends with the end of organic life. But there are cases when the separation occurs and the body keeps going because of the flow of blood and the pumping of the heart. So yes, so that is the answer that the spirits provided us. Next class we're going to start on 157. But this is so important for all of us to understand that there's no miracle, there's no magic. According to and this works for every time we're here together, right? Talking. According to the way you live here is how you're going to find it there. Here in a physical body, the way we live is we're going to make it easier or harder for us when we wake up in the spiritual world. So, this chapter that talks about the return of the spirit to the spiritual world, it makes it clear for us that we have to, little by little, try to detach ourselves from material stuff. We don't need that. Material things are tools for our development to serve others. They're not an end on themselves. Their purpose is not just to please our senses. So the more connected and more tied to matter we are, the harder it will be for those bones to be broken when it comes the time. And harder for us also when we wake up in the spiritual world. For people that worked, that enlightened themselves, it's 1, 2, 3, right? It's a beautiful thing. And for people that were not aware, they can suffer for days, months. It is something that we have to keep in mind. The way we live here is the way we're going to live there. So it's time for a final prayer. So let's thank God for this beautiful moment together, learning and sharing and praying and bringing our contribution to the world in energy, peace, harmony, and healing. And we ask you, Lord, to protect every single family of Ponto de Luz, every single home and every single individual. May they be part of the light that we need to share in our everyday lives. Serve. Be with us, Lord. Protect us during this evening. We have a restful end of this week. And be with us. So be it. So I'm really glad that we could learn a bit more about this tonight, about the separation. And we'll see you next Thursday. And on Sunday, we have the study in Portuguese at 12, Tuesday at 8 p.m., and then we'll see you on Thursday. You all have a great evening, and thank you for joining us.